Malik walked into the bank calm and focused. Just another black man, they assumed, maybe looking for a loan. But they were wrong. Malik wasn't asking for anything. He had discovered a legal loophole in the banking system, a flaw so deep it could shake everything. What began as a quiet visit turned into a silent storm. Managers whispering, phones ringing, eyes narrowing. They didn't see him coming because they never thought someone like him could outsmart their system. This is a story about being underestimated and flipping the power. If you've ever been counted out, this one's for you. Drop a comment if you do the same in Malik's shoes. Malik Davis had always been the kind of guy who didn't stand out, and that was just fine with him. At Horizon Bank, a massive financial institution that seemed to dominate everything around it, Malik was nothing more than a cog in a very large machine. His desk was tucked in the corner of the office, away from the bustling teams of executives who ran the show. Every day he sat in front of his computer screen, crunching numbers, balancing accounts, and sifting through piles of paperwork. No one paid much attention to him, nor did he want them to. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered, and the faint hum of the air conditioning filled the silence. Malik's fingers danced over the keyboard, entering data, checking calculations. It was monotonous work, but it was safe. Safe, predictable, and reliable. He wasn't aiming for the spotlight. He wasn't trying to be a hero, a rising star, or even a well-respected colleague. He simply did his job, kept his head down, and went home at the end of each day. But then, one afternoon, everything changed. Malik was going through a routine check of the bank's transactions for the day. Nothing unusual, just making sure all the numbers lined up as they should. But there was something odd. A few transactions here and there caught his eye, small enough that no one would notice if they slipped through the cracks. A few $1,000s moved around, a couple of offshore accounts getting funded, things like that. At first, Malik thought it was a mistake. Maybe someone had made an error with the accounting system, or it was just a glitch. But then he found more patterns, small, almost imperceptible patterns, emerging with each transaction. And it wasn't just one account. It was across several, moving in and out in ways that didn't seem to make sense. Numbers just didn't add up. It was as if someone was playing a game with the books, shifting money here, hiding funds there, and no one seemed to notice. Malik frowned, adjusting his glasses and staring harder at the screen. Perhaps he was just imagining things, right? Maybe it was nothing, but the more he looked, the clearer it became. This wasn't an accident. This was intentional. Something big was happening right under everyone's noses. Malik's mind was racing as he stared at the screen, his fingers frozen above the keyboard. The numbers didn't make sense. No, they didn't add up, and deep down, he knew it. There was a pattern, a method to the madness, hidden in the noise. He scrolled through more accounts, pulling up details, letting his mind connect the dots. A few thousand here, a few million there, all flowing in ways that seemed too deliberate. The kinds of transactions that were far beyond the scope of his usual work, his usual safe routine. He leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes, trying to process what he was seeing. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe it wasn't as big as it seemed. Maybe there was an explanation that he just wasn't seeing, some sort of mistake. But there was something in the back of his mind, a nagging feeling telling him that this wasn't just an error. No, this felt like something calculated, something intentional. Malik glanced over at the office door. It was closed as usual and there was no one nearby. He was alone. A part of him wanted to pull the plug, stop right there, shut down the computer, and walk away. This wasn't his problem. This wasn't what he signed up for. He was just an accountant, right? His job was to balance books, not to uncover fraud. He wasn't some investigator, some hero trying to save the day. He didn't want to stir things up. But as he looked at the screen again, his fingers itching to investigate further, another thought crossed his mind. What if he could figure it out? What if he were the one who uncovered the truth? The possibilities swirled around him like a storm. What if he went to his manager, pointed out these irregularities, and risked losing his job, maybe even getting caught up in something bigger than he could handle? The more he thought about it, the more he realized he couldn't just walk away. Not now. The numbers were too clear, too deliberate. This was no accident. Malik was looking at something dangerous, something worth millions, maybe billions, and it was all happening right under the bank's nose. But what should he do about it? Should he report it? Blow the whistle? He didn't know if he was ready to risk everything yet. Maybe he could just keep watching for now. Watch and wait. See where it led. Malik couldn't stop thinking about it. He couldn't ignore the numbers, the irregularities that were beginning to show up all over the place. It was like a piece of his brain had shifted into overdrive, and everything he'd seen in the past few days was starting to look less like coincidence and more like a full-on scheme. But what could he do with this information? He wasn't some kind of detective, some whistleblower with a passion for justice. He wasn't even close. He was just an accountant doing his job, going home at the end of the day. This wasn't his fight. Still, the temptation was there. Every time he thought about it, his mind ran wild with possibilities. What if he could make this work for him? What if instead of blowing the whistle and risking everything, he could turn the situation into an opportunity? He wasn't sure where this thought came from, but once it was in his head, it wouldn't leave. He glanced around his small cubicle, making sure no one was watching him. His colleagues were busy in their own little worlds, most of them oblivious to anything outside their immediate tasks. They didn't know the half of what was going on behind the scenes. Malik had a feeling that if he did the right things, the right moves, he could build something of his own. The fraud scheme, it was massive, big enough to make him a lot of money if he knew how to play it. He didn't have access to everything, not yet, but he had the knowledge, the transactions, the patterns, the trends. He had a glimpse into the heart of something that could be worth billions. But if he made the wrong move, if he miscalculated even once, it could all come crashing down. Malik thought about the risks, the threats, the possibility of getting caught in something far bigger than he could handle. It was terrifying. Still, the idea of turning it around, of using his position to build something that could rival Horizon itself, it was irresistible. He wasn't a criminal. He didn't want to hurt anyone. But if he could play the game without breaking the rules, maybe he could come out ahead. Malik sat there for a moment, letting the thought marinate. Maybe this was his chance, the opportunity of a lifetime. But was he really willing to take it? Malik's mind kept racing, but for the first time in days, he felt a strange calm settle over him. The decision had been made. He wasn't going to blow the whistle, not yet anyway. Instead, he was going to watch, wait, and build, quietly, slowly, like a shadow in the night. He'd always been good with numbers, good enough to keep the bank running smoothly without ever drawing attention to himself. But this was different. This wasn't about balancing books. This was about understanding the patterns, the hidden rhythms beneath the surface. Malik had always prided himself on noticing the little details others missed. Now he was going to use that skill for something far bigger than just keeping the lights on. He started small, a few investments here and there. Nothing too big, nothing too obvious. A tech startup in need of capital, a struggling real estate venture, a foreign market that looked like it might turn around with the right nudge. Malik didn't need to be flashy. He didn't need to announce himself. No one was supposed to notice him. Not yet. Each morning he arrived early, well before anyone else, and spent hours scanning the markets, studying trends, and picking out opportunities. By day, he continued his work at the bank, sticking to the same routine, moving numbers around without ever raising a suspicion. But by night, he dove deeper into his side investments, learning the ropes of high-stakes trading and quietly making moves under the radar. Malik didn't take unnecessary risks. He knew better than that. Each move he made was calculated, deliberate, and well-timed. The first few weeks were slow, but then something started to click. Slowly, his portfolio began to grow. A little here, a little there. The funny thing was, no one seemed to notice. At least not at first. They were all too busy with their own tasks, too focused on their own jobs to realize that Malik, the quiet accountant, was quietly building something that could rival Horizon Bank itself. The numbers, Malik realized, weren't just something to keep track of. They were a language, and he was starting to speak it fluently. Malik had been moving in silence for months, staying under the radar. His empire, though small, was beginning to take shape. Steady, slow, but promising. He knew it was just a matter of time before someone started to notice. And sure enough, one afternoon, he got a phone call that made his heart skip a beat. The number on his phone screen was unfamiliar, and the area code wasn't one he recognized. Malik hesitated, staring at it for a moment before answering. "Hello?" he said, trying to keep his voice steady, even though his pulse was beginning to race. The voice on the other end was smooth, almost too smooth. It was the kind of voice you heard in boardrooms and behind closed doors. A voice that didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Malik Davis?" the voice asked. "Yes?" Malik replied cautiously, suddenly feeling small in his own chair. There was something about the voice that made him feel exposed. "I've been watching you," the voice continued. "Your moves, your investments. You've been busy." Malik's mind raced. He hadn't expected this. Had he done something wrong? Had someone figured out what he was really up to? He had been so careful, so quiet. How could anyone have noticed him? I don't know what you mean," Malik said, trying to sound casual. But even he could hear the hesitation in his voice. "Oh, come on," the voice said with a chuckle. "You don't get to hide forever. You've been making quite an impression, Malik. Small moves, but moves nonetheless. You're playing a game, aren't you?" Malik felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't a random call. Whoever this was, they knew exactly what he had been doing. The fraud, the investments, the patterns. It was all connected. Somehow, someone at the top of Horizon Bank had noticed his little empire. "I think you've got the wrong person," Malik said, trying to deflect. But the voice wasn't buying it. "No, Malik, I've got the right person, and you're more involved in this than you think," the voice said, a hint of amusement in it. "But let's be clear, this is just the beginning." Before Malik could respond, the line went dead. He sat there, the phone still pressed to his ear, his heart pounding. What had just happened? It wasn't a threat, not directly, but it was a warning. Whoever this was, they were watching, and it was clear now. Malik's quiet build wasn't so quiet anymore. Malik sat at his desk, his fingers drumming nervously against the edge of his keyboard. The phone call had left him shaken, but he couldn't afford to dwell on it. He had to focus. The truth was, he'd been walking a fine line for months now. Between his quiet investments and his routine job at Horizon Bank, things had felt like a careful balancing act, one small misstep away from disaster. But that call, whoever that voice belonged to, had reminded him that the game was far bigger than he realized. He had always known that if his little empire grew too fast, someone would take notice. It had happened faster than he'd anticipated, though. His side ventures were no longer small-time investments in struggling startups. They were now rivaling some of the bank's own high-level portfolios. The numbers didn't lie, and the more Malik's investments grew, the more the bank's own operations started to look questionable. It wasn't just the fraud anymore. There were other strange patterns that pointed to deeper connections between his investments and Horizon Bank's under-the-radar dealings. Malik leaned back in his chair and thought about the conversation again. The voice on the phone hadn't made any direct threats, but the message had been clear. Someone with power knew what he was doing, and they weren't exactly on his side. As the hours passed, his anxiety grew. He couldn't afford to let this slow him down, but the reality was setting in. He was on the edge of something much bigger than he'd originally thought. The choices were piling up in his mind. He could try to ignore the warning, continue building his empire in the shadows, or he could confront this head-on, whatever that might mean. The truth was, he didn't feel like he had a choice anymore. His investments weren't just a side project. They were becoming a force. And as his empire expanded, it wasn't just the fraud scheme that mattered anymore. There were bigger powers at play, and Malik knew he had to make his next move carefully. He glanced at the clock. It was late enough that the office was mostly quiet, save for the hum of the air conditioning. But his thoughts were loud, too loud. There was a decision to be made. His next move would either solidify his future or ruin everything he had worked for. He stood up, taking a deep breath. This wasn't just about numbers anymore. It was about survival. The next day at work, Malik couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in. Every time his phone buzzed or someone walked past his cubicle, he found himself tensing up, wondering if today was the day someone would confront him about his side projects. Or worse, about the fraud scheme that had started it all. The truth was, he had no idea who was watching or how much they knew. But something about the phone call the day before had made everything feel different, more dangerous. He tried to focus on his regular work, shuffling through ledgers, checking balances, reviewing reports. But it was like his mind was running in circles. The small-time investments he'd been making had already turned into something bigger, something he couldn't easily walk away from. He was no longer just dabbling in the shadows. He was building an empire. The problem was, as he watched his investments grow, he started noticing something unsettling. The transactions within Horizon Bank were starting to overlap with his own. It was like someone at the bank was intentionally feeding him information as if they knew exactly what he was looking for. Was it possible that the fraud scheme was far more complex than he had realized? Or was it a deliberate push, nudging him toward the edge of something much bigger than just a few questionable bank accounts? Malik's phone buzzed again, and this time when he saw the name on the screen, his heart skipped a beat. It was a number he didn't recognize, but the area code was the same as the one from the mysterious call. He hesitated, staring at it for a moment before answering. "Malik," the smooth voice said, just as calm as before. "I've been watching your little empire. You're making some smart moves, I'll give you that. But we both know this can't go on forever." Malik's stomach churned. There it was again. The same cryptic warning, but this time, it was more pointed. Whoever this person was, they were close. Too close. "I don't know who you are or what you want, but I'm not doing anything wrong," Malik said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Oh, we both know you're not doing anything wrong," the voice replied, a slight laugh in it. "But you're walking a fine line, Malik, and the higher you climb, the harder it will be to stay hidden." Malik's hand tightened around the phone. It was clear now. This wasn't just some game. This was a high-stakes battle. One wrong move, and everything could come crashing down. His job, his investments, his future. "Just think about it," the voice said, before hanging up. Malik stared at the screen for a long moment, his mind racing. He was in too deep to back out now. There was no turning back, but the risk, the weight of it, was beginning to feel like it might crush him. The days following that phone call felt like a blur to Malik. He went through the motions at work, endless spreadsheets, balancing accounts, nodding at his coworkers as if nothing had changed. But in his mind, everything had changed. That conversation, brief as it was, had set off a chain reaction he couldn't ignore. Whoever was on the other end of that line wasn't just playing the same game. They were controlling it. And Malik had to decide whether he was going to keep playing or get out before it was too late. He had the feeling that he wasn't alone in this anymore. The fraud scheme, the money laundering, it wasn't just a mistake anymore. It wasn't an accident or a glitch in the system. It was a carefully constructed operation, and Malik was at the center of it whether he liked it or not. Every time he made a move, every time he made a calculated investment, he felt like someone was watching him, waiting, measuring, deciding whether to pull the rug out from under him. He couldn't shake the feeling that it was only a matter of time before someone in the bank figured out what he was up to. The numbers were too close, too overlapping. His investments were growing at an alarming rate, and there was no way the higher-ups wouldn't notice. Malik had to be careful. One wrong move could expose everything. Yet the more he thought about it, the more he realized that his next move could be his biggest move yet. If he could outsmart whoever was pulling the strings at Horizon Bank, if he could leverage the power of his growing empire, he could make something huge, something that could rival the very institution that had kept him in the shadows for so long. He pulled up his portfolio on his computer, his fingers hovering over the keyboard as his mind raced. He had enough now to do something bold, something that would put him on the map. But if he miscalculated, it wouldn't just end his career, it could end his life as he knew it. Malik leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen for a long moment. He had a choice to make. The safe route, pulling back, keeping quiet, playing small, Or the risky route, one that could either make him untouchable or destroy everything he'd worked for? The game was more than just numbers now. It was about power, control, and knowing who to trust. And Malik wasn't sure he trusted anyone anymore. Malik sat in his car, the engine idling as the parking lot of Horizon Bank stretched out in front of him. The building loomed like a fortress, tall and imposing. It was the same place he'd walked into every morning for the past few years, but tonight it felt different. Everything felt different. Tonight he wasn't just another faceless accountant behind a desk. Tonight he was someone with the power to change the game. He'd made his decision. The slow, quiet build of his empire had reached its tipping point, and it was time to make a move. Something bold, something that would force the bank to take notice. He couldn't keep hiding forever. The fraud scheme was too big, the connections too deep. He knew that if he didn't act now, he might never get another chance. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat, and Malik glanced at the screen. It was a message from an unknown number. He'd been getting a lot of those lately, most of them vague and cryptic, but this one felt different. "It's time to make a choice," the message read. "You have what it takes to be more than just an accountant. Don't waste it." Malik's heart raced. Was it the same person from the phone calls? Whoever it was, they were pushing him towards something, but he couldn't quite figure out what. Was this a warning? A test? He shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. This wasn't the time to second-guess himself. He'd already made his move. It was time to act on it. He took a deep breath and pulled out his phone, dialing a number he hadn't called in months. The line rang a few times before someone picked up. "Malik?" a voice said, surprised. "What's going on?" "I need you to make a transfer," Malik said, his voice steady despite the tension building in his chest. "A big one. I'll send you the details." There was a long pause on the other end before the voice responded. "Are you sure about this? It's risky." "I'm sure," Malik said, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. "We don't have time to waste. Make the transfer, now." He hung up before the voice could respond and sat there for a moment, staring at the bank building before him. The decision was made. His move had been set in motion, and there was no turning back now. As he stepped out of the car and walked toward the entrance of the building, he couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. This wasn't just a strike against the bank. It was a declaration. Malik was no longer a shadow. He was playing for keeps. The night was unnervingly quiet. As Malik made his way through the darkened halls of Horizon Bank, each step felt heavier than the last. The adrenaline that had fueled him earlier in the evening had started to fade, replaced by a gnawing uncertainty. His fingers gripped the folder tucked under his arm, a collection of documents that could expose everything. The transfer he had initiated earlier that night was just the beginning. What came next could either be his greatest triumph or the beginning of his downfall. He reached the security door to the vault level, a restricted area, off limits to most employees. Malik had never been down here before, but tonight it felt like the most logical place to be. He had done his homework. He knew the security protocols, the guard rotation, even the access codes to override the system temporarily. But nothing about this felt like the calculated move he had planned. It was messy, dangerous. Malik took a deep breath as he keyed in the code. The door clicked open, and he stepped inside, feeling the cool air of the vault room hit him. He wasn't supposed to be here, but that was exactly the point. He had crossed a line. The information in the vault, records, account histories, secret files, could change everything. If he played his cards right, he would have the leverage he needed to take down the corruption within the bank, or at least to expose it for what it really was. But as he walked deeper into the vault room, a sudden thought struck him. What if he was wrong? What if this wasn't just about fraud anymore? What if someone higher up had already anticipated his move? He couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't the only one in this game. The strange calls, the cryptic messages, someone had been pulling the strings for far longer than he realized. Maybe he wasn't the one in control. His thoughts were interrupted by the soft click of a door opening. Malik froze. A figure stepped into the dim light, a silhouette in the doorway. For a brief, terrifying moment, he thought it was a security guard. But then the figure spoke, their voice smooth, calm, and eerily familiar. "You're late." It was the voice, the one from the phone calls, Malik's heart raced and he instinctively reached for his phone, but it was already too late.